Also, I think there might be a problem with my headphone jack. So if at any point my voice gets cut off, just let me know. So yeah, you're encouraged to take notes. The topic for today is an introduction to Slam, and you're encouraged to take notes. But I'll anyways be uploading this recording to YouTube so that it's easily accessible, because I know it's like cumbersome to download it. So yeah, so today's reading group is going to be an introduction to Slam, and since it's an introduction, you obviously don't need any prerequisites. But I would still like to start by telling you where Slam fits in the whole system of things. For example, we all know in a self-driving car that there are um, different modules, and as you might have been exposed to right now as well, there are planning, there's trajectory prediction, there's segmentation, there's controls, and then there's Slam. So, what purpose does Slam serve in all this? The purpose is that see, all these modules are interdependent. So for example, the take for example the planning module. Excuse me. So for the planning module to work, you need a starting point. At least, let's say for example, for a global planner, you need a starting point and an end point, and of course a map. But if I give you an inaccurate, as we all know, like not everything is like nothing is 100% accurate. There will always be some noise in real systems. So if I give you a point with some error and the destination point with some error as well, so you know that the path that we are going to calculate will also have some, not some error, but it will always try to be optimal. And if I have a huge error in my starting position and a huge error in my destination, so I'll probably never reach my destination. So that's where Slam comes in, that at any point for the car to make a decision to respond to its environment or to anything, it should know exactly where it is in the environment, right? So say for example, you are approaching a red light, and the camera on your car detects some cars in front which have already stopped, and it also detects the red light. So now it knows that it has to stop, but it does not know. It also knows that since it has the map, it knows where the traffic light is, but it does not know where the car itself, where itself he is. So in that case, it will never know when to stop. It might already be at the traffic light, and there might be a huge error, and it's thinking that I'm 1 kilometer further. So that is why we need a very precise estimate. To the reason why I say estimate is because in real scenarios, since we are not in a simulator, I think so. So we won't have the exact ground truth value of where we are. So we'll obviously have a good estimate, and that is the problem statement of Slam. Now the reason it is called simultaneous localization and mapping, also like stop me at any point if I'm going too fast. The problem statement of simultaneous localization and mapping is that, so it's a chicken and egg problem. Um, for example, if you look around you right now, uh, if you were to close your eyes, okay, first of all, if you were to close your eyes, you wouldn't know where you are exactly. Like, you know, you sat down where, but you won't know exactly where you are because you don't know the map, and you always figure out your position relative to something, right? So an object finds its position exactly by referencing to the map. But on the other hand, you build the map of your surroundings also by knowing where you are. So if I know where I am, only then I can make a proper map of my surroundings. So that's the chicken and egg problem in cars as well. For a car to know its true position, it should know where it is in the map. But to build an accurate map, you also need to know the exact position of the car, which is why Slam is an optimization problem. So that is, in a very rough sense, the problem statement behind Slam. This is a very rudimentary explanation. Obviously, there are very detailed algorithms and methods which are used to solve this. So yeah, we'll now start with how these algorithms are approached. I hope this basic problem statement is clear to everyone. Okay. Localization means you're like finding your position in the environment. So first, let's look at the non-SLAM way, where you're not simultaneously building a map and also calculating your position. They are not happening simultaneously. So in non-SLAM methods, like one of the easiest way you can think of a non-SLAM method is say GPS or wheel odometry, things like this. So yeah, you know your current estimate position. As a car, you know, say you have an approximate guess of your position from anything, say from GPS, Google, like from Google Maps, anything. And you also know your velocity because GPS gives us both position and velocity. So you can get an estimate of your next position. So like x finally equal to x initial plus vt. But the problem is that these estimates, as I said, won't be perfect. They will always have some error. So what happens when each of these has an error? I start my car at the origin and the car keeps on moving, but at each time step that it is calculating, it has some noise in its readings. So what happens in the end? These are the positions that the car is recording that it is at. Okay. But this might not be the actual position that the car traveled. The errors at each position can get added up. So like a very simple thing to recall from like basic math is that if variable a has an error range of 2 and variable b has an error range of 3, so a plus b can have an error of 5. It can have an error of say 0, but since it's a range, so maximum error can be 5. So the error can start increasing as well. This is what we call error drift, which is essentially one of the most major causes of error in localization, which you need to like solve. So this is known as drift error, this drift occurs and also increases because of this accumulation of error over each estimate. And since like these are only 4 values, but like GPS, which has very high frequency, so this error might accumulate a lot over time. Okay, so yeah, that was the problem. And how do we solve this? I'll just read this out one. The problem is that the estimation of position and velocity might be erroneous due to inaccuracy in sensor data. So like it said one slide before that, we use the current position and velocity to guess the next position and velocity. But again, the current position and velocity might have some error. Say for example, okay, say we have 2 sensors on our car. To calculate the position, your current position, you use wheel odometry. I hope everyone knows wheel odometry. If you don't, like, stop me. So you have the odometry of the car using wheel odometry, and but the problem with wheel odometry is accumulation of error due to like slipping or anything. And then again, you have another sensor, which is GPS. The problem with GPS is that in each reading it has some error, right? But it can, if you use it in combination with some other sensor, you can actually use the best of both worlds and get a better estimate. So this is a filtration technique, or I should say um, a sensor fusion. Yeah, so we are combining the data from both sensors to get a more accurate value. So this will in turn reduce error. This combination is not only limited to wheel odometry and GPS. It could be GPS and IMU. It could be, as we'll see further, it could be lidars and GPS. It could be wheel odometry and lidar. There are a lot of combinations. You can have even more sensors. You'll have more data to process also, but then you might, if the solution converges, you'll have an even more precise solution. But then obviously there's a trade-off of computational intensity. So yeah, filtration techniques is one of the ways to solve this problem. Not exactly solve, but come to a more precise estimate of your location if you use multiple sensors. Okay, So this was without using SLAM, with using just the sensors on board, and you are just calculating your position based on two different sensors. You are not concerned about your environment. You're not taking the map into account. So what if we do use SLAM? As I mentioned, SLAM leverages this fact that you are in a location relative to the map, right? So it will simultaneously build a map, then find your location in it, then use that location to build a map around it, and then again find a location. So this goes on parallelly, which is why it's simultaneous localization and mapping. So yeah, it uses the environment for localization and also uses that location to build a map of the environment. Yeah. So this example, like one of our seniors gave us this example. It's a very good example that if you enter this room and you are, say, a blind man, you don't know where you are in the room. You will like touch stuff to find what is around you, and essentially that in your brain you are like doing, in a sense, SLAM, right? You touch something, you know there's an object there, so you know where you are relative to it, so you won't bump into it, right? And now that you know your location, you can figure out where everything is by touching it. So if you can actually like, so if for a person who's not blind, if you enter a room, you know where you are relative to the room. For example, if I enter from here, I hope this is visible. One second. Yeah. If I enter from here, I know I'm here because I can see this chair to my left, this cupboard to my front, right, and this bed. So that is how I know I'm here. If even if I take one step forward, I will still know where I am because I have seen these objects in the room and I know where I am relative to it. Right. So these objects um, are, in a sense, features in the environment which you detected and stored in your brain. So now you know where you are relative to them. Okay. So yeah, here I'm going to introduce a new sensor. Maybe some of you have heard of it, some of you haven't. But for those of you who haven't, I'll just like describe it briefly. So, as you might have studied in high school, that there is sonar, which is sound navigation and ranging. So it releases sound, and then the sound bounces back, and it calculates the difference in time. And so you know the velocity of sound, and you calculate the distance between the objects, right? One of the problems which you can think of with sonar is that the velocity of sound isn't that high, right? Say, for example, in air. So if I am in a high speed vehicle, even if I put a sound pulse, by the time it comes back to me, I might be somewhere else, right? So you have to take that error into account, just for example. Now there's a sensor called the LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging. And yeah, this works fantastic because light has a tremendous amount of speed. So yeah, so the purpose of a LiDAR is that, say for example, a revolving LiDAR, I'll say a revolving LiDAR that um, it shoots lasers out of the LiDAR, and also the LiDAR is rotating. So wait a second, I let me see if I have a pen. Okay, I think I don't. Okay, so say you have um one second, I think it will be better this way. Okay, this is what a LiDAR roughly looks like. It's just a cylinder. Yeah, and it rotates about this vertical axis. Okay, so there might be some lasers here, and as this rotates at huge speeds, this like gives out pulses of laser, and those instantly come back, right? So when they come back, you now each laser reflected from a point, and now you have the location of that point exactly in space with relative to the relative to the LiDAR, right? So when you are rotating this LiDAR at huge speeds, you get a lot of points, since they are a collection of all the points these lights reflected back from. So that is the principle of a LiDAR. It's just like a sonar, which uses light instead of sound because of the advantages. and also sends
Yes,
out, sorry. So it sends out light pulses instead of sound, and also it rotates at such a huge frequency that you get millions of points in no time. So
just Karan, maybe we can open SDL32E Velodyne like website and show
right,
the point cloud and the lidar also.
right, 1 second. Yeah, yeah, this is what a lidar looks like. This is how this is where the lasers come in from, and it rotates about this base. As it says, it's a 360-degree field of view because it rotates, right? And this is what a point cloud in real life would look like. These might look like circles to you, but they are just a collection of points which are very, very close. And we are getting circles because it keeps on rotating. And as you can see that it can generate a point cloud of up to almost 700,000 points per second. So which is a huge amount of data, and which is why optimizations are necessary to make it computationally feasible. So this is what a point cloud would look like. This is the output of a lidar, right? And this is how a lidar would map the environment, which is why we use it for SLAM. Yeah, like does anyone have any questions up to this point?
Any questions regarding like what SLAM is in general, or what was discussed even in the previous slides? Okay, if there aren't, then I think we can continue.
Yeah. So that is what a lidar is. It will give you a map of your surroundings in form of a point cloud, right? So now we have a map of our surroundings using lidar. Yeah. So say I take a very, very small part of the map. Just forget about the figure on the right for now. Look at the one on the left. Uh, I have a very, very basic lidar and it just rotated once. And these are a collection of points that I got. These might look like lines to you, but they are actually collect very, very close points. So
Actually, this is a top view. So
yeah,
yeah,
right,
these are
right.
points from like the top view, and these two are actually like two successive scans of lidar.
Yeah. So you can see like they are like roads and this is an intersection. This is that kind of a view. So yeah, this is a very, very highly downsampled view, top view. So since these are two consecutive scans, we can, as a human, we can figure out that they are very close and they also might be the same, might be the same. They aren't, as we know, they're successive scans, but they look very similar. Human, I can tell that. Now, this is how we start applying the problem statement of SLAM. A LiDAR took one scan and then it took a successive scan. But the problem it wants to solve is to find its position, right? So how do you leverage this information of your surroundings to find out your position? Anyone who wants to like make a guess, or I'll like go ahead. If you have just these two scans, there are 3D points in your environment and they are two successive, like if it's at 100 hertz, so it's 0.01 seconds apart. Okay, I'll go ahead. So see, now you have two scans. Okay, you superimpose those two scans, and the right one is now the green one, say. So you can clearly see that they are like, since they're not perfectly overlapping, they are not the same scan, they are successive scans. So like, even right now, stop me if you think you have an answer. Like, how can we use this data to find out how we are moving? Since how we are moving, even our velocity will tell us where exactly we are if we have the exact velocity, because time we have exact, right? So if we have these two superimposed, as a human, you can right now see that if the red was the previous map and if the green was the next map, then I probably went backwards, right? Because the map went forwards. For example, the map went to the right, so the car probably went to the left. As a human, you can tell that. But how will a computer tell you that? Okay, say for example, in a real sense, in a real scenario, I am standing and there's a wall to my right now. So if I move to my left, then the wall is essentially moving to the right? So here, if the second scan is moving towards the right, the car must have moved towards the left. Okay. So how do we?
We can probably use a data association of the known features. Like if we know some features which are getting detected by the LiDAR,
Okay.
so after the movement of the LiDAR, um, mm, I mean, there is a separate data association which we can use to detect which point it is currently at.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that is correct. So we begin by doing data association. So if I know in this whole point cloud that, one second, yeah, that this exact corner is the one which came to this exact corner. So the my car is actually moving in the negative of this vector, right? So if the scan moved, if this point of the scan moved from here to here, then my car is moving in negative of this vector. So that is the thing, that as a human you can tell that these corners are the same, but which point in those 700,000 points, which 2 points in those 700,000 point scans correspond to the same point in a 3D world? That's what we have to find, right? And that's where features come in. For example, here you have edges, so you don't need to like work with one point. You anyways you can't work with one point. So now here I can see a corner. So this is the feature, right? And here's another corner. So now if I match a corner to a corner, I can find a vector, and that will tell me how my car is behaving. So like you said, we find features. These are some features. For example, we found a corner here, we marked it. We found an edge here, we marked it. An edge here. So we have marked like a corner here. So we marked all these. And then we mark the features in the next scan as well. We can take every point, but it is not, I should say, it is not sensible to take all points, since all points, you'll have to compare all points in one scan to all points in the other scan. But it's much smarter to find out features. For example, an edge in one scan will obviously correspond to an edge in the other, right? So it's much more computationally convenient as well as smarter to use features. So now that you have features from both scans, you will start like finding out which feature in scan 1, like where this feature of scan 1 is in scan 2, right? That's what you have to see. So you start by making, like right now, let's say you get the feature association, right? So now you get the vector. Like I'll in successive slides we'll find out how we find out these feature associations as well. So say you have the feature associations. So now you know this vector which came from here to here, which after superimposing becomes this, and from this you now know that the car actually moved in the opposite direction, right? So another interesting thing to note is that all these vectors are the same, which means that yeah, it is behaving as expected. If they are a little curved, then the car had some rotation as well. Like if they are not exactly pointing to one direction, the car had some rotation. For example, this is a bit off, so probably the car had a slight rotation, which is why at a huge r it is creating a difference in theta. Okay, so how do you calculate this vector? Like right now I said that assume you have this vector from this point to this point, but how do you calculate this vector? So this vector in SLAM terms, or in general as well, if you have a point in one scan and a point in the other, what mathematical mapping do you have to go from that point to the next successive point? It's called a transformation, right? You transform from one scan to the other. You, if I were to explain in more mathematical terms, if you have a point xyz, you apply a transformation to that xyz, which it's a transformation matrix, say, and that transformation gives you a new value of xyz, x1 y1 z1. So our problem is that we know x0 y0 z0 and x1 y1 z1, since they are the corresponding points in 2 scans. But we want to find that matrix which satisfies x1 equal to ax0, y1 equal to ay0, and z1 equal to az0. So that is what the problem of transform calculation is. Just to go back to the big picture and summarize all this, what we have done right now is we used a sensor known as a LiDAR to constantly get a feed of our map, and using that map, using the successive changes in the map, we are finding out how we are changing as well, right? If I give you the initial location that the car started from 000, and then you use a LiDAR, so you can exactly find out where you are in the world, exactly, because after that you know the exact vectors between 2 scans after the car starts. So right now we are at a stage where we have 2 successive scans, like 2 scans of our surroundings, and we have to find, like, when I took scan 1 and when I took scan 2, what change happened between my position. That is what is called the transform matrix. Like, and what we're doing right now is transform calculation, right? So okay, so the first one is least square approximation on features. So how do you find a set of, I'll go back to this image. How do you find like a set of vectors which minimizes, um, like which gives you the optimal solution? How will you find this optimal set of vectors? One possible thing is that you use a least square solution. So you find out that this feature corresponds to this one. This could have corresponded to this one as well, but then it wouldn't satisfy a least square solution. I hope this is even a little intuitive why we are using a least square solution. It's just so that since since a LiDAR operates at such a high frequency, you know that between 2 successive scans, the features will be nearby. And if you use a least square,
Just-
yeah, yeah,
Actually, the least square solution, actually what you're explaining right now is the iterative closest point algorithm.
yeah.
So actually, can you go back to the next slide? To the next slide. So yeah, the third algorithm here is the iterative closest point algorithm, is what Justin was explaining right now. So in this algorithm, so basically, because the LiDAR actually operates at a very high frequency, so the frames that come out of a LiDAR are very close to each other. So if you just take the closest points in between the 2 frames as corresponding points, then it's probably a good assumption to like assume that the corresponding corresponding point between the 2 frames will be the points that are closest. So yeah, that is the iterative closest point algorithm. The least square approximation is actually, least square approximation, if you haven't heard about it, is actually a way of solving it's a way of solving like linear equations, a system of linear equations. So yeah, this current
Yeah, we'll get those math in the coming slides. Yeah, and then there's one algorithm known as RANSAC, random sample consensus. I'll just give you an example of RANSAC. I think some of you might have already implemented it. That random sampling consensus, you can use it, for example, in plane, like to find if you have a point cloud and you want to find out the plane in the point cloud. As a human, you can see the plane in that point cloud, but for example, if I were to go back to, okay, 1 second, yeah, to this, right now you can see the plane in this point cloud is the one on the ground, right? But if I were to like ask you how you would find the plane, then that is where the RANSAC algorithm comes in. For the sake of like this presentation, I'll not go into the math of RANSAC, but just understand that so it just chooses random points, and if you are trying to, for example, find out the biggest plane in a point cloud, the probability of you choosing a point from that plane is going to be very high, and it uses that fact to tell you which plane is the biggest one. That is a, I would say, somewhat a rough example of what Ransack does.
In fact, if you have less number of points, say you have about 200 points or like even 1,000 points, you can use Ransack even to like find the transform between 2 point clouds. Like Ransack is not a very good algorithm to use if you have like how like if you even have thousands of points, Ransack will be a very bad algorithm to use, because the sample space that you have to search for the transform will be very huge because of the large number of points. So you can use Ransack to find transforms, but at like very lower, like when your point cloud is very sparse. So for example, 100 or 200 points, you can use Ransack to find the transform.
Because it's essentially a brute force algorithm, since it's going to sample 1 point from the whole sample space again and again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah,
right.
just
Yeah.
before we continue, like if you have any doubts regarding the
Right.
previous slide, we can talk about it after the reading group. Yeah, we can go into details if you are interested, but yeah, you should continue, right? Yeah.
Okay. So just like right now we used a LiDAR, there are obviously some downsides to using a LiDAR. The upside is, of course, the accuracy. Since we have such a huge point cloud, we know exactly where our car is because of that data. But in a lot of cases, using a LiDAR is not feasible. The main two reasons being computational power and cost. So LiDARs are extremely expensive, and also processing millions of points will take up a lot of computational power. So that is where Visual SLAM comes in. That Visual SLAM uses cameras. They might be monocular vision or stereo vision, like it can be one camera or two cameras, and instead of point cloud, it uses images to perform SLAM. Yeah. But like as I said, LiDARs are more accurate. For example, if I do have even if I have stereo, like for those of you who know what a stereo cam setup is, why do you think like a stereo would perform worse than, or like why is Visual SLAM in general worse than LiDAR? Because even we have two eyes and we are able to perceive depth very, very accurately. So why is it that if we use two cameras, we will be less accurate than if we use a LiDAR? Or even like, yeah.
Maybe construction of the depth map may be mm, costly, like I mean in terms of a cost function.
Yeah, I mean, you are right. So I think a better way to put it would be that because of, how should I say, for example, if I tell you in case of, if I start from one image, you can't perceive depth at all, right? And even while perceiving depth from two different camera sources, there are, for example, there might be one part of the image which one camera sees and the other camera does not see, right? So that is information you're losing out. And also, yeah, there are other camera intrinsic related errors which might occur. And one more
There
thing
may
is,
be errors in camera calibration as well.
yeah, and also why in some cases Visual SLAM is not preferred, because like just for one example, it won't work in the dark, right? Because you won't be able to perform any depth estimation because your camera can't see, but your LiDAR can. But still, Visual SLAM is very prevalent because of the factors I mentioned, like cost and um, computationally less expensive. So yeah, we model a camera as a pinhole. Okay. Humans perceive depth because of two eyes. Um, yeah. Okay, so how do we perceive depth using two different cameras? I mean, there are obviously algorithms which exist, but the rough structure behind those algorithms is that they say, for example, you find one of the camera finds two features in an image, and the other finds the same two features in its image. So using the difference in position of the two features in their relative images, in their own images, I think I can explain it better with an image that I have. 1 second. Yeah. So say if I have, this is the left camera view and that's the right camera view. So I identified some features here and then some features here, and then I again performed feature matching. You can think of this as analogous to the LiDAR scans. So now I have two images and I'm thinking about how my features shifted when my camera view shifted. So now I know that um, with respect to how the image changed, how I moved, right? I think I'll show you a video for this exact algorithm. So before I show you the video implements exactly this, that between, like in the case of LiDAR, we were having 2 point clouds. Between the 2 point clouds, we are trying to find the features and then find the correspondences between the features, and that told us how our car was moving in the like inverse direction. So this is doing the same thing, but in images. So now instead of points, you find out features in those RGB images, and then you find out corresponding features in the immediately next image, and that tells you that between those two frames how your car has moved. I'll just cover features quickly, that what kind of features can we detect. So like for those of you who know this, you might have seen this in Winter Workshop or somewhere, that there's Harris corner detection. There are other features like Huff transform. Then there is the, I think it's called a bin histogram. There's a histogram feature as well. Like you can make a histogram of features. And yeah, there are some these are some different features that you can extract from an image. For example, from an image you can also extract the gradient, right? So these are just features which, the better features you get, the easier it is for your system to compute the transformation between two images. So yeah, for example, one dimensional feature means that there is only there are only points, it's only a set of points. But now you have the shape of the points, because now they are not points, they are shape of objects. So now there are two dimensional features, right? Because now shapes are involved as well. So yeah, I'll show you this video now. Look at look carefully at how between two consecutive frames it is calculating. You'll see small vectors pop up in the image. Those are actually the depth which it is perceiving, and it will tell you where the car is moving as well. So using its cameras, it is like also able to, is being able to perceive depth as well. I'll show this once more. The points that are green are further away and the red ones are closer, to just to show depth. And the points at which you are seeing these red and green points are the features that it's detecting. So it's constantly, since this is at a high frame rate, it's constant, you can't see it, but it's finding out the transform between those features consecutively. Okay.
This is between two using two cameras, right?
Yeah, that one was, yeah. So
Okay.
even I tried to find out, like it was a little difficult for me to find out like how many cameras they're using, because they haven't mentioned it anywhere. If they are using one long camera or if there are multiple cameras. But I assume that since it is perceiving depth, it will probably, like, you can perceive depth using one camera as well. Sorry, I'm saying depth, I mean transform. You can find out the transform using one camera as well, because between two successive images. Right now we are checking between, we can check between two side images as well, right, using depth. But if you have two consecutive images, you can find out the point cloud, the feature matching from there as well. So you can, so that is where visual SLAM bifurcates into monocular SLAM and stereo SLAM.
So
Right.
yeah, so I think the video that you just showed in there, that was a single camera. Like it
Was
was
it?
using, yeah, I think it was a single camera.
But is it like one long camera?
Yep.
Because it says that 4 images, the previous, the current, and the left and right images. Like this is why I thought it was a stereo setup.
But you do see that the features are moving outwards, right?
Yeah.
That is because the car is moving forwards and it is comparing it with the previous image.
Yeah, since we have paused it at a good location, you can see that what Shreyansh is saying, that from the current feature to the next feature, it is showing a transform of like out of your screen, which tells how the feature has moved. So now you're moving in the opposite direction. You're actually going forward. You can see these arrows. Okay. Okay. So till now we looked at how to use LiDAR and also cameras to perform, like to find out the transform between two consecutive frames and thus finding out our actual position. How we found out the actual position from, like how did we find out the our actual position from consecutive frame to frame transforms between 1 and 2, 2 and 3. So if I initialize, I know where I started from exactly, which is 0, 0, 0, 0. And then I know that in my first transformation, I moved 1, 1, 1. Then between 1 and 2 again, I know I moved 1, 1, 1. So now I know I am at 2, 2, 2, right? So that is how frame to frame transformation helps you to find out where you are, like in total. Also, this is not just for location. Since it's a 3D LiDAR, you can also find out orientation, your exact orientation. Like provided you have a, like, even if you don't have an exact estimate, it will converge to a very good approximation of what your orientation is. Okay, so loop closure. Say you started at this position, your car is here, and at time step 1 you went here, then here, then here, then here, and your car recorded that you are here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right now your car is telling you that at position 2 you were here and at position 6 you were here. But you look at your LiDAR data and you look at your current LiDAR position and you look at the map and you find out that you are actually at the same position. So you did go from here to here, but you find out that um, these two positions actually correspond to the same position on the map. So as we saw in the first slide, this kind of an offset might have come due to GPS errors, odometry errors, anything. So if these two errors are off, this means that this is also off, like all of these are off, right? So um, how do we use the knowledge that these two are the same place to also improve our estimates of where we have been, like where these places were, right? So that is what is known as loop closure. Loop closure meaning that you know you have been to these places and you also know that these 5 are actually like 4 points because these two are the same points. How do you um, improve the quality of the position of these points knowing that these are actually the same thing? So that is what loop closure is. Yeah, so you know your initial estimate, but then you start drifting, but at some point you realize that after this point, so like the next scan isn't shown, but the next scan you realize that you are at this point, right? But now you know that since they are not coinciding, all my previous estimates might have had some error. So now think of it like a rubber band. These edges are like a rubber band. If you pull, if you pull these two to force them to join together, and these are all like all like pegs, and you force those two to join together, then to bring it here, there will also be some force applied on all these edges, right? Which will result in these edges coming somewhat, like they will definitely come closer, right? Because you're trying to minimize distance here, so the area of this will also reduce, so all these will come closer. So that is in a nutshell what loop closure does, right? And also like one of the techniques for loop closure, which is post graph optimization, which this is what it does, that it refines the position of where you have been in the past, knowing that you are right now at a position you have already visited. You have completed a loop. You have you have performed loop closure, right? So I'll show you the animation once. Yeah. So now that you know that you are going to the same place, yeah. So this is your next position. You know that, but now you know that there are errors here. So you pull that rubber band, and then you get an estimate which is closer to the real values of where you would have been. Even right now they are a little off. As you can see, the peach color is the ground truth odometry and this is our localization, but it is a better estimate because we used loop closure, right? So loop closure is again one of the methods which is used to localize cars better, and this can also happen only if you have the map, right? Because only then you can know that yes, now I'm at the same position again. Any doubts up till here? Okay. Okay, so this is video is not entirely on loop closure. Also, like this was done by Shreyansh. So this is loop closure that we performed on 2.2 dataset only. As you will see initially, like you will realize later in the video of how huge the impact of that drift error is. So I'll play this once. Yeah.
So this is the um, 2.2 and
Academic area.
academic area roads actually in our campus.
So this, yeah, this is done using the buggy, and yeah, this is the top view of the point clouds.
So right now, what I basically did was so for initial alignment, I manually aligned two different maps. So I'm basically just aligning one of the scans from each of the maps. And yeah, so right now, can you go back?
Yeah.
Huh. So so right here I manually aligned two scans from. So what we are trying to achieve here is we are trying to merge two maps that we had created. So from two individual runs of the car, and to merge those two maps, we have to like give them an initial estimated orientation with respect to each other, position and orientation. So that is achieved by like aligning two scans from those two maps which happen to be of the same location. So this is what I'm trying to do here. I'm manually aligning two scans from each of one scan from each map, so that those two maps like have an initial estimated position with respect to each other. Yeah, can we
So that ultimate they can ultimate if we have a only if we have a good enough estimate, is that when we can converge. Otherwise we might get a divergence also. Yeah.
so yep.
Yeah, since they were these separate maps were recorded in separate runs, so that is why we need to initialize one part of connection between the two maps, and then like loop closure will take care of the rest.
So right now, yeah. So right now, the maps have been connected, but they haven't been like the merging process hasn't started yet. So right now, I'm just connecting the maps.
Yeah.
So yeah, three. I think I connected 3 maps over here. Yeah. Oh, so here's the 4th one. Yeah. So 4 maps. Yep. So now the actual optimization process will begin. So you'll see that these maps will start to align together as we keep on optimizing the graph. Yep. Can you pause this, Karan?
Okay. Sorry.
कोई नहीं.
Hmm.
You,
Hmm.
I
कहाँ पे?
think you fast forward a little too much.
Yeah, tell me when.
Can you pause here? So right now all the maps have been aligned well in like, so they all have an initial estimate of where they should be with respect to each other. Now to align them like even more accurately, what I'm trying to do is so these 2 lines that you see are actually the paths that our car took. So they should be fairly close to each other, but because of drift error, they have like been like there is some difference, like they are not very close to each other right now. So what I'll try to do is I'll take scans from those 2 maps and I'll merge and add an edge between these 2 graphs, and hopefully that will reduce the like distance between these 2 lines that you are seeing. Yeah, we can discuss about it in more detail if you need to, if you want to know the like
We just
details
connected
of how.
two
Yeah.
runs at one point. We just defined an edge, and after that, like if we run loop closure, then the like algorithm will take care of the rest. Yeah. So
We
look
can
closely
discuss
at.
more about the graph structure of this map separately if you want to know.
Also, like look closely at the part which is being highlighted. How your how where we are actually using the algorithm is affecting the rest of the parts. Just like when you're trying to connect two parts, the rubber band is also affecting the rest of the positions. So yeah, look at that part. Yeah, and because it has a huge number of points, that's why it's 600x. It's going that way. Yeah, I think you all saw this video in your intro seminar as well. But yeah, that is how the algorithm behind it works, right? Okay.
I have a doubt.
Yeah.
Why did you have to align it initially? Won't feature matching take care of that automatically?
Yeah, but
That's a good. Just you want to explain?
yeah, like for example, like if I explain in the case of a least point method, even if we have the features of both of them, your closest point might not be the same features, right? If they are far apart, if your initialization isn't good, you might choose a correspondence which is not the same feature. So we need a good initialization, which is why like we can use GPS, because we know GPS is not that inaccurate that it will give us two very distant images, but we need a good enough initialization so that we can converge and obtain a least square solution?
I think maybe so. To add to Jaskaran's answer, what we were doing here was that we had made the initial maps using feature based transform calculation, but while merging these maps, the repository that we were using did not support feature based like map merging. So the repository that we used that was supporting that had ICPs, the closest point method. So since it had like it used the closest point method, so we had to give it an initial alignment, a good initial alignment, in fact, so that the closest points that it generates, it's like they contain the correct correspondences. I hope that should answer your question.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yep. So just to add on that, so you could think that so there's actually work going on this right now in AGV to actually initialize it automatically, since you saw that I had to initialize it manually, right? So it's not a very streamlined process in that sense, that you have to go in and put in like human effort to initialize the maps. So to streamline that process, we have been trying to like integrate GPS into maps so that they initialize on the basis of GPS, and that should be good enough of an approximate to give the ICP algorithm good correspondences. So yeah, that's something that we have been working on, and we'll probably be working on that in the like coming months. So yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Okay, I think
Yeah.
if there are no more questions, we can proceed.
Okay, so a little complex topic ahead, which is least square approximation. Okay, so say you have this system of equations, and as we know, like from the matrix method, that this can be expressed in this format as well, and then we can write simply ax equal to b. So how usually do we find out? So what we need to find out here is x, right? In purely mathematical terms, we need to find out x, and a and b are just two set of, like, in 2D space or 3D space we would say points, but they are just two set of matrices which we need to solve for, right? We need to find a function which maps a to b. So like if we are able to find out an exact x using, okay, ax equal to b and x equal to b a inverse b, then why do we need a least square approximation? I mean, I guess everyone here must have come across this at some point, that ax, like if we just take b to the other side, ax minus b equal to 0, and this will be 0 if we have an exact solution, right, which satisfies all values of a and b. So if ax minus b is 0, we have an exact solution, but that might not always be the case. So yeah, I'll go case by case. N less than k, n equal to k, n greater than k. Here in this equation on the top, take n equal to 2 and k equal to 2. So now you have two equations and two variables which you can solve to find an exact solution, right? So here you have n equal to k. So n equal to k, you have an exact solution. If n is less than k, you have one equation and two variables. You have an infinite number of solutions. So like in 2D space, if you have one equation and two variables, x and y, then you have a line which has infinite solutions. In the other case, when you have more number of n's, so you have two variables but three equations. So all of like you might not find a solution which satisfies all three equations, right? So in that case, we find out a best fit to that solution, to those points. I'm not sure, but I don't know if you guys got came across this in your physics lab, where you get a set of readings and they might not be like, they'll never be exactly linear, at least in a real lab. So then you use least square approximation or linear regression to find out the best fit line. So that is exactly what this means, that you don't get an exact solution, so you try to find out the best fit solution. And that happens when we have like redundant equations, or two variables and three equations. In that case, you won't have an exact solution, so ax minus b won't be equal to 0. So let's define r here, where r is the difference, ax minus b. And our aim, like r stands for residual, okay? So our aim will be to minimize this residual to get the best fit equation, right? Optimally, it should be 0, but now we have to minimize. So yeah, to minimize this vector r, what do we need to minimize in scalar terms? The norm of this. So this is equal to mod r, and this is what we need to minimize. So if we like go to the left hand side, uh, if this corresponds to the right hand side, this corresponds to the left hand side. So this is what we need to minimize, right? So this is called the least square approximation. You need to minimize the sum of squares. Okay, so in other words, we have to find out ax minus b, which is this ax minus b, minimize mod of ax minus b. So ax minus b is equal to this r, and we have to minimize mod of r. So essentially we have to minimize mod of ax minus b. And yeah, like we won't go through the derivation here, but this is a solution which we will come at. Yeah, you can look up the derivation online. One easy way, I would say, which I used to remember this is, if you like see a transpose, it's actually ax equal to b. But since to get x you need a inverse, and a inverse might not always be invertible, so we do a transpose a to make it a diagonal matrix which will always be invertible. That's just a shorthand which a friend of mine told me. So yeah, it's actually ax equal to b, but then we multiply a transpose to make it invertible. So yeah, so now we have the least square solution, the least square mapping, which is x from a to b. Now, why would we need this math? So if you take a as scan1 and b as scan2, so we need to find a transformation matrix, a transform from a to b, which will tell us, like, since it won't be exact, there will be some error. So that is the optimization problem, that we need to minimize this residual error. So from scan a to scan b, our aim is to find a transformation which gives us the best fit solution. So say you have two scans, x1 and x2, and right now let's take only 2D points. So for one point in scan 1, x1, y1, we need to find a transformation, this 3x3 matrix. And like, if you have seen this, if you haven't, don't worry about it, but if you have, then this is essentially the rotation part and this is the translation part. C and F is the translation part, and we have 0, 0, 1. So we have to find out this transformation matrix, which when applied on this point gives us the other point. How would we do that? Okay, first we take the transpose, and 1 second. Yeah, so we take the transpose and then we simply multiply it with one column, and then we multiply it with the other column, and x1 y1 1 multiplied with abc, and we get x2, x1 y1 1 with def we get y2, and with this we'll just get 1, since 0, 0, and we'll get 1. So now we have two equations and we have two variables. So we apply a least square approximation here using okay. I think I missed out something here, Shah. Did I miss out something? Okay, got it. I guess I'm not able to remember the math behind this, but I'll share the slides and you can go through it. But like the end point of this math was that if we break down the transformation of the x coordinate of point 1 to the x coordinate of the other point, we can find out these 6 variables using like only these 2 set of points by doing a least square approximation, and these 6 variables will tell us the rotation, because I think the values are if we get the values of these 6, it's actually c equal to the translation in x, f is translation in y, and then this is just cos sine minus sine cos, or maybe the transpose. Yeah, so then you get the theta also. So from x1 comma y1 to x2 comma y2, if we perform least square solution, so for one point we have from x1 to y1, from x1 y1 to x2 y2, but if we have multiple points, then x1 y1 x2 y2, we can, for one set of points we have this equation, but if we have more points like in a point cloud, we can just stack these points one over the other, and then we'll have x11 y11 1. So just imagine stacking these points one over the other, and then we'll have this equation. And if we solve these two equations using least square approximation, we'll get an estimate to ABC. How we'll do this is like using this formula that, where is this? Yeah, this one. So ax minus b equal to r, and so we had ax equal to b, and we had to find a best fit x. So right now we have a similar equation form. Yeah, ax equal to b, and we have to find out the best suited x, which is def here and abc here. So we find out abc and def from these two, and um, we won't get an exact solution most of the times, but yeah, we can perform the same operation like that. Since this is a and this is b, so we can do a transpose into a into x equal to a transpose into b, right? If you use these two matrices and substitute them with values of points, you'll get an approximate x lq to this df, and that will be the approximate, that will be the least square approximation of your transformation from scan1 to scan2, where x11 y11 x12 y12 are the x comma y points of scan1, and these are the points of scan2. So y21 means the y coordinate of point 1 in scan2. So if you have two scans, then you can find out the relative transformation using this. Okay, do we have time for ICP? I think we do. Okay, so if you remember in that slide, we had iterative closest point. So what this algorithm does is, if you have a set of point clouds, as you can see on the figure on the right, initially the point clouds are not aligned. I really hope I'm audible. Yeah, initially these point clouds are not aligned, and our task is to align them, and by aligning them, so we find out what transformation, in this case we find out what transformation to apply to the red point cloud so that it goes to the black point cloud. And if we get the value of that transformation, we then essentially we know what was the orientation difference between the two point clouds, right? So think of these two different scans as two different scans of your car, and you find out the relative transformation between the two different scans. So now you also know, if you take the inverse of that, how your car moved to get those two different scans. So that is what we do with the iterative closest point algorithm. What we do, okay, I'll describe the algorithm once. So what we do is, if we have a, like these are two scans, say the red and blue one. So since the name is iterative closest point, for each point we pick, okay, for each point we pick its closest neighbor. We mark these as correspondences, right? This is point to point ICB, that for each point it picks its closest point. Say this is for this it's here, and then yeah, so for each correspondence it picks its closest point. What it does is it after picking its closest point, you get correspondences, and then you perform an iterative solution in which at each instance, so you have an estimate, then you find the correspondences, then you try to find a transformation which would minimize the error between those correspondences. Yeah, I'll just show you. So instead of matching features, match every point between the two scans. Makes it kind of inefficient, but yeah, this is this is vanilla ICP, the main ICP. There are many more variants to it which make it more efficient. After that, when you have found the correspondences, you perform a least square approximation to, now you have the x1 y1 and x2 y2, since you have the set of correspondences. So now you can perform a least square solution to find out the value of, you have ax equal to b, so now you find out the value of x. Now that you find out the value of x, you know the transformation, at least in the first iteration, the transformation between the 2 point clouds, and then you apply that transformation to that point cloud. You find out the correspondences and then you transform it. So in the first iteration, it won't go the entire way, but these are at least 20 iterations. So at each iteration, let me just go back. Yeah, now that it found the correspondences, it will try to minimize the error. So say these were two set of point clouds, this and this. This corresponded to this to this, and this to this. So it tried to align. After the first iteration, it did not come the whole way. It became like this. The transform wasn't accurate enough, or maybe this corresponded to this in the first iteration. So this happened. I'll erase some part of it. Say to repeat, the correspondences weren't good enough. Okay, where's the pen? Yeah. So, and it calculated that this is the correspondence to this. This is the correspondence to this. This might happen if you don't have a good enough initialization. So it did not converge the whole way, but it came to this point, and then it said that, yeah, this is the transform that I calculated. And then it starts looking for its new correspondences again. So this time it finds these correspondences. And finally, when you perform the third iteration, it will usually never converge at the third iteration, but then you have a perfectly aligned point cloud. So now you know how much translation and rotation you had to give to these points to reach this point, right? The transformation will be same since they're point clouds. So now you know the transformation for this to go to this. Since you know the transformation to go from the circles to the crosses, you also know the orientation of the circles with respect to the crosses. It will just be the inverse. The circle is here with respect to the cross. It will just be the inverse. So that is essentially what ICP is doing, that it finds correspondences. For each iteration, it calculates a least square approximation for the transform. It applies that transform and then goes back to calculating correspondences. Now, one issue which, as Shansh mentioned, might come with bad initialization. So if you have points here, and if you have your crosses here, so this will correspond to this will correspond to this, and ultimately you might end up with a solution which is this. And now, what do you do after that? Because whatever iteration you perform after this will only result, if you want this to correspond to the circle, these will have to not satisfy. The error will start increasing here. So my point is that if you don't have a good enough initialization, all your points might not converge to their perfect correspondences, which is why you need a good initialization as well. Here, I'll play this animation again. Here the correspondences were good enough because they are close, and they almost every point here will find out its closest point, and which is also, there's a high probability that it is also the same point. They are the same points in the consecutive scans. So since we had a good initialization, so in a couple of iterations only, it converged. Also, if you see like quickly, there are some lines which join these 2 points. These are the corresponding lines between the 2 points, between 2 closest points. If 2 points here are connected by a line, it is because the algorithm detected them to be closest points. Okay. So yeah, before I like show you this example, this is the last 2-3 slides. So I'll just sum up everything once. We used a LiDAR to map our environment, and using that map of the environment, we are trying to use 2 successive scans, the data from 2 successive scans, to try to find out, like from the change in the 2 successive scans, we are trying to find out the change in our position. Now, how do we find out the change in 2 successive set of points? We find out how one point should be transformed so as to get the other point, because the inverse of that is exactly what has happened to our car. If someone lost their train of thought here, just stop me. Okay, I'll repeat that we are trying to find the transform from point cloud A to point cloud B, which is scan A to scan B, because the inverse of that is what happened to our car. If I'm moving ahead by 1 meter, then the map is moving towards me, or in a vector space, it is moving towards the back by 1 meter. So if the map is, if I'm walking towards the wall is moving back by 1 meter. So now I know that I am actually moving forward by 1 meter. So if I find out that B has transformed this much relative to A, now I know how much my car has moved. It is just the inverse. So this is what ICP is doing. It is helping you find out that transformation between 2 set of points. And it uses a least square approximation to find that optimal transform. So now remember those point clouds which I showed you initially, the top view. We will apply only 3 iterations of ICP to it and see the results. So this is how it was initially superimposed. After 1 iteration, it found its correspondences here and here, like shown in those correspondences images. And this is 1 iteration. And this is the 2nd iteration. So we have set a threshold that after a point when when mod R is less than 0.01, say, we will break. So because otherwise it will just be computationally very expensive, and also we are getting frames at such a speed that we need to perform localization fast. So we set a certain threshold, and after that we use that transform. Now, of course, that transform is not going to be perfect. It's just a best fit transform. So that is the whole optimization problem, that how do we find the best fit transform? And if ICP had been the solution, then this would not be an area of research, because there are many more methods which are used to supplement ICP or do better than ICP. There are variants of ICP. There's point to point ICP, which is this one. There's point to plane. There's GICP. There are many variants which perform better than this one. So yeah, if you're interested, you can search about the variants. But the plain vanilla ICP works like this, that it finds its closest point and then finds a transform, applies the transform, again finds the closest point, finds the transform and applies the transform until you have a close enough solution. And now you know the transform between the 2 point clouds and hence your position in the map. So yeah, I think this is the last slide. Does anyone have any questions? Was I audible the entire time?
Yeah, you were audible. So, can you give us a sense of the computational resources this takes, or what frequency at what frequency does this happen in autonomous cars?
Depends a lot on the quality, of how many points you are processing at once, right? So for example, if you do get 700,000 points, you won't be using all of them. You will be downsampling them to say 50,000 points. Like if you have a very dense point cloud, you don't really need all the points, because if you have 100,000 points in just a plane, you don't need all those points. You probably need just 1,000 points to find out that it's a plane. So yeah, we downsample it by a lot. So it is very subjective on like how much time it takes to calculate between two successive iterations. Depends on how many points the point cloud is taking in.
Yeah, makes sense.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so maybe you can get a sense of how much time it takes to align point clouds by, say, for example, if you were aligning two LiDAR scans, then it would take about, so it takes up into the, like, it is in the order of tenths of seconds. So like 10 or 20 or 30 seconds it will take. If you're aligning two raw point clouds from directly from the LiDAR, because they have a lot of points, so it will take a lot of time to align them. But if you apply, so like in my second year, I was working on this for like aligning point clouds from LiDAR scans. So if you apply filters, so what I did was I removed the ground and I applied like a voxel filter, which is basically downsampling the point cloud. So that brought it down from like 20 seconds to about like 1.5 seconds. So you can even optimize it further if you have implemented ICP on GPU, which is what like people are doing right now at Open3D. So yep, so the ICP right now at Open3D runs at like 60 FPS on LiDAR point clouds. So yeah, it's pretty fast. Yep.
But there of course is a downside to downsampling as well, that you will lose out information. So yeah, like downsampling also increases your time, but you also lose out information. So you might, like, not always, but you might lose out on some small features.
So like even if it works at 60 FPS, the LiDAR has to be very quick so that the point clouds are like relatively close. So what is like at what frames rates do the LiDAR work?
Yeah, so a LiDAR basically it works. So usually we record data from LiDAR at 10 FPS, because if you record it at any more like frames per second, then it is too much data and you don't really need that much amount of data to localize the car. Even if it has like if it is at 10 FPS and the car is moving at about 20 or 30 kilometers per hour, then that is like a good amount of data to perform localization on. But
Yeah,
a LiDAR can supply data of more frame rates per second. So it can, I don't remember, but I know at least it can go up to at least 30 or even more. Yeah. So we had to throttle it down when we were recording. Yep. Is that what you were asking? Or?
yeah, that is what I was asking.
Any more questions or doubts or anything from the slides that was a little confusing and you want to go over again? Okay. Skram?
Then I'll stop recording as well. 1 second.